Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our latest video we have for you today. And of course, this one is the second video in our PS4 Repairs from Hell series. We've decided to make a bit of a feature of these as they come up, because they are a more in-depth repair, and to be honest, I think it's quite interesting the sort of state that some people do get themselves into. So my apologies today if I do sound a little bit funny. I seem to have got hold of this cold that's been going around, and it's going on my chest a little bit. So if I do end up sounding like Barry White halfway through this, then I do apologise for that. But anyway, back to the PS4. This one was sent in via eBay. We do have a very limited number of listings a month, where I sort of offer you guys the option to mail your machines in. Consoles or just the board on its own is fine. This particular guy elected just to send his board in. In a way, judging by the state of this, I'd wish he'd actually sent the lot, because I wouldn't be surprised if this is just the tip of the iceberg, to be honest with you. So, excuse me. So basically, this particular machine was sent in by a guy through eBay, and basically he thought he'd got a bit of a bargain. He said he bought it from a car boot sale, and basically the seller had it up for 100 quid. Seemed genuine enough. He said the hard drive has a boatload of games on it, which I'd be very doubtful of having seen this. He says it works perfectly, and at 100 quid, of course, this guy snapped it up, took it home, plugged it in, expecting this perfectly working 100 quid PS4 to work perfectly, and of course it didn't. And when he opened it up, of course, the following sight greeted him. Now, apparently this thing does start to a white light. I'm not going to plug it in to find that out, because, to be honest, looking at the state of that circuit around that HDMI port, I think firing it up any more than what it already has been is simply going to cause more harm than it's going to do good. So, as you can see there, basically what's happened is somebody has taken a heat gun, a paint stripper style heat gun by the looks of things, to this board, and it looks like they've tried to change the HDMI port, because it isn't a genuine Sony part. It is an aftermarket port, so it looks like they have changed it anyway, but in the process of doing so, they've absolutely sodomized the HDMI circuit. So that is probably never going to work again, I wouldn't have thought. So that is going to have to go. The circuitry around it, a lot of the components either look really horrible and burnt and nasty and are going to require changing, or they're just blown woefully out of position, are covered in flux. Now, whatever the hell flux that is they've used, I don't know. It's all been burnt on, it hasn't been cleaned off, and it does look, in places you'll see, like here you've got some red, these little test points basically, and you'll notice they're red. That is where the flux they've used has actually started to corrode the board. Now there are some really fine little traces and things like that run around this circuit. It's quite possible that some of those are not present anymore as they once would have been, so we may have to run some link wires and things of that nature to actually restore this circuit to full working order, but we will see as we go along. The first thing we need to do is get this thing cleaned up and see what we're looking at. As you can probably also make out, there looks to be some horrible sandy coloured shit all over it. That is basically, again, corrosion of the components because the flux hasn't been cleaned off, and to be honest, even no clean flux can become corrosive over time, so it's always beneficial if you are using any sort of flux to make sure you clean it off properly before you put things back together. So if you've run flux underneath BGAs, then flush the BGAs out with alcohol. If you've used flux on the PCB itself, make sure you clean it off with some alcohol, preferably in an ultrasonic bath because that will get the most of it. If you haven't got one, just get a toothbrush or a fairly stiff bristle brush and just give it a bit of a scrub and make sure you get everything off it before you nail it back together. It just saves yourself a lot of headache in the long run. So looking at this, as you can see, the top side looks a bit horrible and the bottom side, to be honest, looks absolutely no better. Some more burnt flux residue. You can see the bottom of the Ethernet port has copped it a little bit, but not too badly. Luckily our HDMI encoder IC shield is still over the top there, but whether what's underneath it has survived is a very good question. So what I mean by that is, if you actually look down the... I don't think you can see this really. I don't think the light source is going to be good enough. No, it's not, is it? Just looks like shadow to you. But looking under there, everything does seem to still be in its position and not, you know, it doesn't look like any air's got underneath the plate there to knacker whatever's underneath it. But what does concern me, of course, is that basically all this circuitry here topside interfaces with the HDMI encoder IC. The fact it's all being blown out of position and some of these things are crossing pads that they shouldn't be connected to does make me wonder if certain parts of this circuit have been shorted out and may have caused permanent irrevocable damage to the actual encoder IC itself, which may mean that we are also going to have to replace the encoder IC, but first things first, we basically just need to get this thing cleaned off and see what we're working with. So we're going to give this a quick clean. We are then going to remove this HDMI port because it's buggered. We're going to see what sort of state everything's in underneath, because it's quite possible that owing to the fact that this flux has started to corrode certain little bits of this board, that it's also been left, and basically the back of this HDMI port was crusty and horrible as hell. As you can see there, so it's quite possible that some of these pads are going to come out with this port. It's just the way that things happen when they've been done in such a poor state. I mean, don't forget, of course, these pads are actually resined into the board, so, you know, the fact that this has been hit with so much heat may have weakened those pads significantly to the point they're just going to come out with a port anyway. So, yeah, this is not going to be pretty, I don't think, and it's going to be a bit of a palaver. Luckily, we do have some donor boards, which is handy because I think the biggest part of this is going to end up coming with us. So remember what it looks like now, boys and girls, and for those of you who missed the November-December update video, I will just pop the stills of this actual board in there now so you can have a look. First things first, we're going to clean this board and see what we've got to work with. Okay, so first things first, we need to clean this thing off. So what we're going to do is we are going to get some isopropyl alcohol. This stuff is pretty strong, it's 90% proof. Don't drink it. I know it's tempting, certainly the way my throat is at the moment, it could do with warming up, but not with some of this stuff. So we just got some neat IPA on the end of a clean stiff bristle brush, and basically we're just going to start popping this in situ over the circuit. Now you don't need to rub too much, because what I tend to find is if you pull a bit of this on and leave it to sort of work its way around everywhere for 30 seconds or so, then it tends to actually help you clean things off a lot easier. So just get it into all the nooks and crannies. Basically we need to get all of this flux residue off this board because it's already started to damage it. We don't need any more damage. Is this board going to come perfectly clean again? I don't think so, but we're going to get it as close as possible. And at times like this I really do wish I had my ultrasonic cleaner. I do have my ion one actually, rather nice sweeping frequency, heated unit. It's about 500 odd quid. But when I look at things like this and I sit here scrubbing it with my brush, and I keep wishing I had one because it's the only way to really properly get this thing clean again, then, you know, I start looking at these things and go, yeah, do you know what, I fancy one, because I'm sure this is not going to be the last time I see a HDMI circuit like this one, I'm telling you now. So we're just going to try and get as much of this flux up as possible. Now the thing is as I said to you earlier, it does appear as though this board has started to corrode. So some of this that looks a bit like flux residue, unfortunately probably isn't. But yeah, like I say, you just need a fairly stiff bristle brush. You don't want to go too hard on it. Let the solvent do the work. So like I say, all you need to do is really just get the solvent into where it needs to do its job, leave it to sit, and then just go back over and just lightly scrub it away, because of course we don't want to be doing any more damage to this section of the board, as it, you know, than already has been done. It's weak, it's, you know, it's not happy, so we do need to be careful. Now, one thing I haven't actually done is that, I mean, we've seen the state of the HDMI port, and we've seen the state of the underside of the board, and we can see that the Ethernet port itself has been slightly melted. I have no idea actually whether the internals of the Ethernet port have been melted. I haven't actually looked at that yet. To be honest, it may be a case that this is just going to have to live without Ethernet. We could change the port out if need be, I suppose, but there's always Wi-Fi. And I know all you hardcore gamers are going to look at me and go, Andrew, no, Wi-Fi. What are you talking about, man? There's no substitute for a good cable. I suppose you're right, but you know, what can you do? In this instance, you just need to be glad you've got a working PlayStation. We'll worry about its network connection later when it works. So, as you can see now, we are starting to get the biggest part of all that junk up and off the board, because frankly, you know, leaving that stuff on the board simply is not an option, and applying any more heat and activating it any further when it's in the condition it's in is only going to make it harder to remove. And it may only cause more damage to our circuit board in the long run. We have to get rid of all that stuff. All of it has to go. So of course this machine is an original launch unit. It's a CUH1003A with an SAA001 revision motherboard. Now, luckily enough, the HDMI encoder IC circuit is the same between the SABs and the SAAs, so if you can only get hold of a donor board for one or the other, and you've got the other board, don't worry about it, because it's the same circuit. You will be pleased to know. So, you can't quite believe, can you really, that this thing ended up in the state it did. But you know, it's like you know, I've had messages off people, you know, saying, oh, you know, I've got blue light, you know, and you know, I know you reball stuff, but you know, can I just reflow it like the old PS3s with a heat gun and a toaster oven, and you know, and all that sort of good game. And this is the exact reason as to why I tell you, no, you can't, and no, you should never, ever, 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 ever even think about contemplating about trying to do things like that. And this is why, because this is the kind of damage that paint strippers and things such as that nature, which are not designed for this job, you know, this is the damage they cause. And, you know, even if you're a professional with that sort of kit, you know, I'm not saying you're going to do this, you know, you're not, but, you know, there's a reason why people like myself, hobbyists and people who do this for a living, go out and spend, you know, several £100 on a hot air station and several £1,000 on BGA rework machines, because ultimately, you know, if we could all do it in our ovens, or, you know, buy a cheap 60 quid toaster oven from Home Bargains, or, you know, whatever else to do this work with, them, you know, surely we'd be doing that. And the other thing is, of course, is that people also ask me, Andrew, what's the cheapest? You know, I've seen, you know, these rework stations for best part of £1,000, and, you know, that's a bit out of my price range. I've seen these hot air stations, they're 200, 300, 400 quid, but, you know, they're a bit out of my price range. You know, what's the cheaper equivalent? Unfortunately, that is the cheaper equivalent, you know. Trust me on that. You know, when I started out, I bought an Apache IR Pro V4 SC, and you know, I tell you what, I think if I'd bought the Jovi to begin with, yes, it was 1,600 quid, but I think if I'd have actually bought this machine that I've got now, before I bought that, I'd have been more successful with my repair jobs a lot quicker than what I actually was. You know, ultimately you've got to realise that, you know, these are the cheap options, you know. And that is just the way that the world works, you know. The sooner you sort of start to realise that, yes, you can buy an air station for, you know, 40, 50 quid off eBay, but it will be next to a toy. I know, I've had them, you know. I'm not telling you this because, you know, I'm sat here now with the 1,600 quid Jovi BJ rework machine, and I'm sat here with a 250 odd quid hot air station, and, you know, and a 400 quid fume extraction system, and, you know, and the best part of everything else, and, you know, and I can sit here in my tower and sort of crow that you shouldn't be buying the cheap stuff. You know, I'm here to help you guys out, and the way that I am helping you out is to say that, look, you know, that really cheap stuff is next to useless. I've had it, I've tried to use it, you know, I've been sat up here, you know, when I started out for hours thinking, where am I going wrong? Why isn't it working? You know, is it me? Is it what I'm doing? I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. And then once I've got the better tools, and I've just done what I do, and all of a sudden it starts to work really nicely, then you realise, you know, stuff that you thought was impossible to do with Air Ones, and stuff that you thought was, you know, incredibly difficult to do with Air Ones, suddenly becomes incredibly easy to do. And then you realise that all this time, you know, you've actually probably spent more time and effort and energy and tweaking your processes when you didn't need to. So in the long run, it's actually probably ended up costing you more than it would have done just to have got this decent stuff in the first place. So, you know, that's just the way that things are. So don't make that mistake of buying cheap kit, because you buy cheap, you buy twice. You know, not just in the quality of the kit because it doesn't last, but also because ultimately you're going to end up wanting to replace it very, very quickly anyway. So yeah, we do have a little bit of burnt flux residue on there. I'm just going to get that with the end of the tweezer. So we have got the biggest part of this horrible flux residue off the board now. Thankfully. The biggest part of that is now up and away, and we'll give you a good look at the end result in a sec. It's disgusting, it really is. It's disgusting. This is simply the worst condition board I think I've ever worked on. Which may just show my naivety in this field, you know, a bit wet behind the ears still. That's the worst you've worked on, Andrew. You should see some of the things I've had. And I'm sure to some of you this may look trifling, but to me it looks positively nightmarish. So I'm just going to dab this off, and we're going to get the best part of the residual alcohol and crap and horrible stuff off this board. Okay, so we've got the biggest part of the horrible fluxy residue crap off this board, and the components now look nice and clean, and what's left of them. Okay, that's looking a whole lot nicer now. So I'll turn you around. And before I do, actually, I'm just going to have a quick rub at the back of this HDMI port with some alcohol. Now this port is coming off, it is going to go, but as I say, I want this work surface clean of the old flux and everything else and all the other old crap before I start. Because any contaminants on this board now are just going to serve to give me a headache later, and I don't want that. So as you can see now, we are looking a whole lot nicer than what we were, you know, a few minutes ago. So there you go. So we've still got crap on the port. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about that. The port is going. I simply wanted rid of the old flux residue and all that sort of stuff topside, and as you can see there now, we have rid of it. Luckily enough, scrubbing up these bad points seems to have lifted the biggest part of the contaminants away, so it looks like we've just about got this board in time before it's done any real lasting damage to the substrate. Excuse me, which is really, really good. So hopefully this now is just going to need us to reset some of these components. Now, we aren't reusing these. Any of these that have moved, any of them that look like they've got a bit hot, are going to go by the wayside, and we are going to replace them. We are going to be using our quick 861DW hot air wand for this particular part of the job, and we're just going to drop the new components on in place. So we're going to remove the old ones, we'll re-tin the pads, and then we'll drop the new ones in situ, and then we'll get rid of this. Well, actually, no, to be honest, before we start, I think we're going to get rid of this first, clean up under there, and then we'll get to work on redoing the circuit. And then, once we've rebuilt the circuit, it's going to be a case of taking the plate off the underside of there and just making sure everything's hunky-dory under there. If it is, then we'll plug it in and test it and see what happens. Now, to be honest, if that encoder IC has survived this, I will bear my backside in Tesco's this tea time, because I don't think it will have, owing to the sheer amount of heat put into the board, and owing to the fact that the components have been bridged onto, you know, different parts of the circuit that they shouldn't have been. I think it's going to have got a rather nasty shock up its backside. So, but we will see. So join me in a sec, guys, and we will get to work on removing that HDMI port, and let's see what sort of state our pins are in underneath there. Because, as I say, the amount of flux and the heat used may have damaged them and may cause them to lift as we pull these out. A couple of ground pins may come out. I wouldn't be surprised to see the not connected pad come out, because they are literally just epoxied in, and this board has had quite some abuse with a paint stripper. So we will get to work on that now. So join me in a sec, guys. Thank you very much. Right, okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we've just gone around and given the bottom of this board a really light cleaning as well, just to try and get rid of the biggest part of the crap that was on it. We have done that now, so now the time has come to try and remove this HDMI port from this PS4. So anybody who's seen the HDMI port replacement tutorials will know that we are going to apply a bit of flux to these ground posts. So these basically anchor the HDMI port to the board and provide the biggest part of the strength of the port. We are also in this instance going to apply a little bit to the back pins of the HDMI port just to encourage the solder to flow, because these pads are weak anyway and they're going to need all the help they can get, preferably without me having to whack them with too much heat for too long. So we have our port in situ there now, so you can see it. We are going to get a bit of air, so my apologies if this gets a bit noisy. So we have our airflow at 100 litres of air per minute at 485 degrees C. Get our grips on standby. We're just going to go around now and gradually heat the pins on the bottom side of this board. It stinks, it absolutely stinks. HDMI port has fallen out. And rather fortunately, it looks nice and clean. It doesn't look like it's taken any pads with it. So while we've got heat in the board, I'm going to apply a little bit more flux to these ground posts. Touch of desoldering braid. Just going to apply heat to the ground posts and wait for them to go silvery. Those holes have now been cleared of the old solder. I'm just going to go over the sides of the old HDMI port now with some leaded solder. interesting blade. You've just withdrawn the remnants of the old leaded solder. Off the pads our HDMI port used to sit on. And there now, as you can see, have a nice, clean, shiny set of pads of which to solder a new port to when the time comes. And there's a bit of old crap there. Let's get rid of that. And there you go. So as you can see now, the HDMI port contact pins there are looking nice and straight. The holes are nice and clear of solder, which means that putting the new port in place is going to be nice and easy. So the next job is going to be to straighten out this part of the circuit, and that's what we're going to do next. First things first, we need to get rid of the old stuff which is no longer in situ. So anything that is no longer in situ is going to go and is going to be replaced, because obviously it hasn't got hot enough to move it, and judging by the amount of heat that's been put into this board, you know, I'm not even going to bother measuring it and move it back. It's just going to go and we're going to replace it. So as you can see, these diodes here are going to go. A couple of resistors here, one is missing, one has got to go. This diode here should be pin 13, is going to go. This capacitor here is going to go, a couple of capacitors here are going to go, and then we'll see these couple of resistors here are going to... a couple of resistors there weren't actually attached or anything, they've just been blown off. So we're going to get a donor board and we are going to replace those components, but first of all, of course, we are going to remove So we've knocked our airflow down to around 70 litres of air a minute. We're going to get some fume extraction back over this part of the board. And we're going to start heating things and picking them off. So we're going to get this capacitor first. There we go. Not even going to bother with measuring, see if it's good or not, it's going to go. Diode, which should be part of the circuit which goes to pin 13 with your HDMI port. This one here. Is going to go, and we're not going to bother measuring it. This little diode here that sits directly behind the HDMI port usually is going to go, and we're not going to bother measuring it. Two resistors that sit directly behind that. Are going as well. Nice try. Nice Disk drive resistor. So let's see what else we've got here. We have a couple of surface mounts here, which are sat together. Should not be sat together. Those are going to go. So let's just see what sort of state we're in now. This cap at the back here has been moved out of position. Again, it's probably okay, and we could probably straighten it up, but not messing about. Let's go on. Otherwise, generally speaking, everything there looks straight enough. And as it should. So we're going to change the end of the tip of our soldering iron now. And we're just going to tin and prepare the pads where the components were lifted with a touch of fresh solder so that they are ready to receive their donor parts. Dab of flux on those two pads there because they don't seem to have to take. They're nice for a shoulder, but they do now. So. Our board is now ready to receive some nice shiny new parts. So, I'm going to clear a bit of space on my desk. I'm just going to pull these off and bring them over. So, my apologies if you don't see too much of the pulling them off. just going to tin the sights of our new components with a tiny bit of flux. Basically this is going to be pretty quick, and we're just going to drop our new components on. Just going to turn you around for a sec. just applied another dab of flux there over the top of those components we've just reseated. And the final wave over with some hot air will just encourage those to sit nicely onto their pads and line up. Beautiful. yourself with tweezers, it's not fun. So if you are sat there laughing now, I don't blame you. I'd say there now. Here we have our components successfully transplanted. So we're just going to go over this. Area that we've reworked with a touch of so, as you can hopefully see there now, excuse me, as you can hopefully see there now, we have all our components back in place. And hopefully they're all nicely soldered back into position there now. So hopefully you can't tell which ones we've replaced. Hopefully you're thinking, wow, that does look good. So the next job, of course, is to replace our HDMI port, and that is next on our list of things to do. So join me in a sec. Okay then, so HDMI port replacement. So basically we're going to get a drop of flux. Probably have a touch too much there, for being honest, but it won't matter. And we've got some few much traction. I'm just going to get a drop of leaded solder out. touch of alcohol back over the points there. Lovely jubbly. So those pads now are nicely tinned, they have just the right amount of solder on there to make this next bit nice and easy. So our nice shiny new HDMI port fresh out of the packet. Okay, so we've just inserted our new port through the ground holes of the board and made sure that all the pins line up. So we're going to apply a little bit of flux to the back. And the pads are of course already tinned. You've seen us do those. So from this point what we're going to do is we are just going to tack down a couple of pins at the rear of the port. My apologies if I just block the camera for a sec. Apologies if I can't see much at the moment. I'm just going to have to go round the back of each one of these pins and just tack them down. Okay, so we've got those points tacked down into position now. So now they're roughly in position. I'm just going to get a bit of flux again down the back of the port. And this is the key to making sure that your HDMI port is nice and properly soldered. What you do is you clean the tip of your iron, you tin it with the tiniest touch of solder at the end of your iron, and you literally start from one end and drag it all the way to the other end. you've got them all, you basically just clean off the pins with a bit of IPA. Usually just get a little Q-tip or a cotton bud in the corner then. And just soak that out. Then you want to have a quick look to see if there are any shorts in there. Because let's face it, there may be. If so, just pop another dab of flux on there and just clean the tip of your iron. Don't add any more solder, but just try and walk the bridge out across the pins, and eventually you'll get it where they all sit nicely soldered and they look uniform and they're all nicely intact. So we're just going to check the continuity on these pins now, and we'll come back and we'll show you the finished article. Okay, so what we've done there now, as you can hopefully see, we'll try and get you a good view of this now, so you can get a bit of appreciation as to what it is that we've been doing today. We now have the finished article, as it were, to take a look at. So, as you can see, hopefully as you can see, if my autofocus will behave itself, there we go. So we do just need to go around and give this section of the board a final clean up, but as you can see there now, that's looking a whole boatload nicer than it used to be. So we've got rid of the old sort of nasty flux residue. That's all gone now. Our components are all back in situ where they should be. Any that were moved out of position, we have replaced. The rest actually didn't look too bad. Didn't look like they'd been hit with too much heat, so those have stayed for now. And basically that, in a nutshell, is that. We have replaced our HDMI port. I will get you a look at that in a moment. But yeah, you know, so it's not taken too long to do. It's not taken a significant amount of time because we've got the right kit to do the job with. And to be honest, that's half the battle. Anybody can do this kind of work, providing, you know, you use a little bit of logic, you know, and with a bit of practice and the right tools, you know, there's no reason why you at home could not learn to do exactly what I'm doing here. So, we'll just get you a look at the back of the HDMI port now. Hopefully there you can see that we are nicely soldered into position there now. We basically have used a drag soldering technique on those pins at the rear there now. And those are all now nicely soldered. You look down, they're all nice and straight, there's no bridges, there's no shorts. That is good to go. Our actual board itself there now, as you can see, all that old burnt flux residue and all that sort of stuff has now disappeared. All our components are now back in place and where they should be. They're all nicely soldered to the board. So all we need to do now is pop a bit of fresh thermal paste on this thing, because that's horrible, and we'll put it in our test chassis and we'll fire it up. Now, whether this will actually work off the bat, or whether, as I suspect, we might have a couple of issues with our HDMI encoder IC, well, time will tell. Time will tell on that front. That is what we need to discover. So that is only something we're going to find out really when we actually go to fire this thing up. What we can do, just as a really quick test, because of course you know, this is by no means an exhaustive test for a bad HDMI encoder IC. You know, sometimes, just finishing cleaning the thermal paste off the APU, just bear with me. Pin 13 will read to ground from the rear of the HDMI port, which is basically this pin here on this diode. That pin there will read to ground, and at the moment on the multimeter we have a reading of OL. OL is open line, so that's ground. OL open line over 1 on some multimeters, which basically means infinite resistance, so no interaction with ground, which is exactly what we want to see. That's good. Like I say, that's by no means an exhaustive test for a bad HDMI encoder IC, but in quite a few instances I've seen recently that has been the case. So it's just a quick test there. So yeah, that all looks good. So what we're going to do now, boys and girls, is we are just going to add a little bit of thermal paste to the top of our APU, which I've got here. It's only cheap stuff for testing. I do use AS Arctic Silver, or Arctic MX4, should I say, these days. Genuine legit stuff, but for testing, you know, that no cheapo stuff does for all of the 30 seconds it's actually going to be powered up for. Right, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got the console plugged in to our TV here, so we're just going to fire this up into safe mode. Because it's board only, of course, I've had to put it in a test chassis, so the hard drive isn't mated. So it's going to boot down into safe mode right now. There we go, and as you can see, we get output to our display. We've got a nice white light on top of our PlayStation. I'm just going to go and install the software update to this box now. Okay, we are just ready to boot into the dashboard of our PlayStation now, so it's our usual start screen there. We have sound, which of course is the other important component, isn't it? So there we go. I have no Wi-Fi antenna hooked up to this machine at the moment, so it might be a little bit weird behaviour wise, but too bothered for the time and date for now. And there we have it. Let's just go into settings, sound and screen, video output, resolution set to automatic, so we'll try 480p, we get that, 720p, we get that, 1080i, we get that, and 1080p, and we get that as well. So we set this back to automatic. And that's that, so we'll call that fixed, and I will see you on the next vid.